All right, Mr. Hochreiter, looks like you're good to go.
All right. Well, good evening, BV friends and families. It's very nice to see you. Thank you for spending a Friday night with us. It's PTA movie or PTA meeting, dinner, and a movie with the superintendent, your principal, Mr. Cohen, and Mrs. Schuchman is with us, who is our executive director of PPS. So I know we've had to do a lot of weird things during the pandemic, but a Friday night PTA meeting ranks right up there. But thank you. We know everyone's schedule is packed and full, and we're thankful you're with us. So many of you submitted questions or topics or wanted us to touch on a few items tonight. So we did invite Mrs. Schuchman. She's our executive director at PPS. She leads all of our initiatives in the district with regards to special education. She works with and supervises our counselors and social workers and school psychologists. She and her team are working on the transition plan to support students. Should we move to Princeton Plan? There are a lot of questions and concerns around mental health of students, especially during the pandemic, and transition planning and making sure kids are connected and feel supported as they move throughout our district, regardless of whether we adopt the Princeton Plan. So I'm going to turn it over to her in a second because what Mr. Cohen did is he took all your questions and identified some themes for us and shared them. So we hope that we'll be able to talk through many of the questions and comments that you had. And then toward the end, we'll open it up for a Q&A. That worked well during our morning session. But I'll first tell you why we're here in case you have forgotten or you're new to us and don't know. A number of years ago, Indian Point announced their closure. Indian Point will close and basically throw the keys in. They are going to move out on the last day of April this year, so really in less than 2 months. Indian Point accounted for 30% of our budget. So 3 out of every $10 that our school district has and uses came from Indian Point. That's a very significant chunk of change. So just like you would have to do at home, if you lost 30% of your revenue as a family, you'd have to make some really, really tough decisions. And that's why we're talking about potentially adopting the Princeton Plan, because our school district is losing 30% of its revenue. So for the same reasons, we're having those conversations. We're looking at many different areas where we could save some money, because if we save money, that means that we can reduce everyone's taxes on this screen. For 10 years in a row, our average tax increase in our school district was 1.04%. Unheard of in Westchester County. I would say unheard of maybe in New York State. Last year, as you know, we approved a budget that had a 5.9% increase. Now, the drastic increase was due directly to the result of Indian Point leaving town and no longer having that revenue. Over the next 8 to 10 years, if the Board of Education does not adopt the Princeton Plan, we can expect tax increases anywhere between 6, 8, maybe as high as 9%. The reason is because when you lose 30% of your revenue, we have to make that up one of two ways. One way you make it up is you cut programs and reduce costs. A second way you make it up is to increase your revenue by increasing taxes. The key is to try to find a healthy tension between the two, where we tighten the belt and we reduce some costs and lower taxes, or I shouldn't say lower taxes, tax increases perhaps would not be as high as projected. When we started this this project in Discovery a number of years ago, our taxes, and I say our because I live in the school district as well, our taxes would go up on average 14 percentage points a year, each year for 4 years. Those increases would cover the amount of revenue we would lose from Indian Point. We've made a lot of headway in terms of advocacy. We've met with our local and state officials, our federal officials. Just a week or two ago, you may have read some information about the New York State Cessation Fund. That is money from Albany that will be delivered right to the school district to keep our programs up and running and to reduce taxes. The reason we ended up with talking about the Princeton Plan is because we had a study commissioned by a group of independent consultants. Their job was to look at our facilities and look at the number of students we had to advise us on if we could organize students differently throughout our schools. Could we save money? We could. And in fact, that's why we're talking about the Princeton Plan. There were proposals to close schools. There were proposals to move fifth graders to the middle school. There were a lot of different proposals, and even some people in our community wrote in their own proposals last year. One of them called for closing BV and Furnace Woods, and then building on to other schools. So all the elementary students were in the same one big school for 6 years. The board decided and asked us to study with a little more specificity the Princeton Plan. The Princeton Plan basically is you have all students move through their elementary experience together by grade level. So it doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter your zip code, none of that matters. All the students would be in 3 schools designed by grade level. So let's call them school A, B, and C. School A would be kindergarten and first grade. School B would be second and third, and school C would be fourth and fifth. So imagine your 5-year-old who hasn't stepped foot in school yet. They would show up at school A as kindergartners, and the only students in school A would be all of the district's kindergartners and all the district's first graders. And the kindergartners would move through K through 6 together. They would switch schools every 2 years. So let's say they would start at BV, 2 years later they'd go to Frank G, and let's say they would end up at Furnace Woods. There are some concerns with that families have raised, but there are also a lot of strengths and opportunities with that, which we're going to talk about next week and maybe even a little bit tonight. So that's how we got here. What we're doing is we formed a stakeholder committee, a group of people from all walks of life in our school district, to examine whether or not the Princeton Plan would be a good idea for us to pursue. So we had PTA members and parents, we had business and community leaders, and we had some of our staff. And this week, they had a series of meetings to have a facilitated conversation to determine whether or not the Princeton Plan is right for us. And Mr. Cohen participated today. Mrs. Schuchman participated Monday. I see Antoinette Pio is on the call. Did you participate, or was that Sandrina? No, you participated.
Yeah, I was on Monday.
She was on Monday, and Katie Valentino also participated. She represented BV. And everyone had a conversation saying, okay, let's think about the Princeton Plan. Let's identify the strengths of it. What would be the strengths of adopting the Princeton Plan in our school district? What would be the weaknesses? What are the opportunities, and what are the threats? It's called a SWOT analysis, SWOT. The idea is to celebrate what we believe would work, and then to identify some of the issues or the challenges and determine if we could mitigate those issues and challenges, whether it's take additional time to implement the Princeton Plan, develop different programs to support students. Whatever the challenges or whatever the concerns were, the school district would then figure out, could we overcome them to make sure that kids receive the best education and that there are no issues as they move through the system. So no decision has been made. A decision will not be made likely until the end of March or early April. We probably will schedule another meeting or two like this after the SWOT analysis is complete, so our entire community can see what everyone believes that the strengths and the weaknesses and the opportunities and threats are of the Princeton Plan. And the Board of Education ultimately will need to make a decision. They want your input, they want your feedback. They've asked me and Mr. Cohen and Mrs. Schuchman to go to different meetings. Mrs. Schuchman and I will be going to meetings in the other schools to have this conversation. So that's why Mr. Cohen asked for your questions in advance. Those questions are very similar to questions I received when I met with Furnace Woods parents or Frank G. Lindsay parents. So the good thing is we're not really surprised, and what's even better is everyone is talking about the same thing. Everyone's interested in learning the same information. So that means everyone's starting at the same level and has the same baseline information, and that's really important to make sure everyone has information that they need. So Mr. Cohen, as I said earlier, identified a series of topics and themes that we'll touch on tonight. We're going to start with Mrs. Schuchman, who's going to talk a little bit about special education and student supports. And that's my dog barking, so I'm going to go figure out what's happening. And I'll be right back with you. But Mrs. Schuchman, take it away.
Got it. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on Friday night. I have a few questions that were posed, so please feel free to put in the chat if you do have questions, because probably after my presentation, I'm signing off. But one of the questions was, what if my child has resource room or other special education services? And as I said this morning, I believe our special education services will be even stronger if we're together by grade levels. There's more collaboration. And I think we can actually do more programming than what we currently have. So that doesn't go away. We still have ICT. We'll have ICT skills. We will have resource room. We'll have consultant teacher. None of that disappears. It all stays the same if we do go to Princeton Plan. And the next sets of questions is about SEL and support when and if we do this, but also when your children return to school. How before transition will help be available for our students. And again, if we do transition to the Princeton Plan, the social workers and psychologists and I have been meeting and talking about different ways we could do this. We have the virtual field. We're hoping that we can do some meetings with each building principal, with each building once we get there, if we do get there. However, the positive thing is Ms. Marino, Ms. Montavo, who is new, Ms. Polito, Dr. Wynn, and Dr. Lupiani are known to most students with in all of the elementaries because they do rotate buildings. Ms. Polito, as most of you know, sees every student in K-5. She's our school counselor that does a lot of our second steps, our social-emotional learning curriculum. And then the two social workers are in all three buildings. Either they have you in the building or your child virtually if there's some counseling happening. So I think the transition piece of them getting to know the adults is going to be a little bit easier than we would have had in the past. As far as additional staff, that was another question asked. Right now, there is no additional staff being hired. However, we do have Dr. Wynn right now is in the middle school. She does do one day at Furnace Woods. We have enough leeway in our schedule that we can utilize her in other buildings. The other question, and I'm sorry, my phone just closed on me and I can't remember the third question that was here, was what kind of mental health teams will be in the building? And that's a great question. So every building will be equipped with either a social worker or a psychologist. And Ms. Polito will continue to circulate through all the buildings because she does service all the grades doing the social emotional curriculum. The one thing that I can say about Ms. Polito is this might make her job a little bit easier and kids would get to know her a little bit better because she could do a cycle at a time. So 6 days with one team, with one grade level, 6 days with another grade level. So she's not traveling amongst the district to service all kindergarten students. So we do have some plans in, and we do have some basic planning and how to return, but we can't do a lot until we know exactly what's happening with Princeton. But we definitely will help with transition and helping you and your child transition as well. In the chat, does special ed services still remain the designated grade level schools? So it would actually stay with grade level. So every building would have ICT skills. The 12-1-1, if we go to Princeton Plan for parents that might have students in the 12-1-1, there'd be a K-1 in one building, a 2-3 in another building, and a 4-5 in another building. Because most of our 12-1-1 students are students that do push into ICT and are able to move amongst all the services. So we want to make sure we give them the opportunity. Right now, I think we're looking at the ABC program, and this is not finalized. ABC would be in two different buildings, the K-1 and the 4-5. But again, it's not finalized. It's just a thought we have on the table based on what other schools have done that we visited with self-contained classes. When transitions from the 5th grade to the middle school are the same services provided you are doing for the Princeton Plan? Not really sure, Mrs. Perry, what that question means, but when you say the same services, so the middle school doesn't have ICT skills, it has ICT. It has, it's a little bit different. So in ICT skills, we split up the ICT class, so it's 2 hours in the gen ed program and 2 hours with a special ed teacher. That's not in the middle school. It's a little bit different. As they hit to the middle school, they're ICT students or consultant services. We do also have the 15-1-1 classrooms for each grade level on every content level. Will Princeton Plan allow for true enrichment programs for those students who would meet the criteria? That's a really good question, Ms. Monks. I am not the person to ask that question to. That would be Dr. Ruller, and I'm sure Mr. Hochreiter could answer that. My answer is probably yes, because everybody is so, they're put together by a grade level, right? So when you think about...
Yeah, I'll just jump in.
Go ahead.
Years ago, when Mr. Cohen might have been working here, certainly Mrs. Schuchman and I were not, and Mrs. Flanino may remember this too. The district had a program called Horizons, and it was the enrichment program. And toward the end of Horizons, there was one teacher, well, Horizons had a bunch of different iterations, but sometimes kids would move schools to go to the Horizons program. Sometimes the Horizons teacher went to the schools. So it was very uncoordinated. Okay, Jen, remember, she's an alum. That's right, I knew that. So by having all of the students together in the same place at the same time, we don't need to move kids out. We don't have to have teachers come in. Imagine having 6, 7, or 8 teachers per grade level, because that's what the Princeton Plan would allow. We would have much greater flexibility for different grouping opportunities, whether it were kids that wanted to do Lego robotics, or students who were reading 3 grade levels above, or kids that wanted to work on STEM projects, or out in the garden. There would be a greater opportunity because all of the kids at that grade level are in the same place at the same time. We don't have to have kids move from one building to another or have a traveling teacher. So I wanted to make sure I commented on that opportunity. Sorry, Mrs. Schuchman.
No, you're fine. And I would say the same thing goes for our special ed programs. So some of you may be a Frank G parent, but your child has services at BV. At this point, children will not have to move buildings. So if second grade is second grade, second grade is second grade, whether your child needs resource room, whether they need ICT skills, a 1211, they wouldn't have to move buildings. And I think that's probably one of the biggest pros that I see as a special educator, because of the fact that you have the opportunity right within that building. You don't have to uproot your child. You don't have to move them, whether in the middle of the year, the start of the year, and then they're with their own either peers that they've known forever too, because it continues that way. So I think that's something, that is a huge positive. I think our elementary special ed program is extremely strong, and I think we have many opportunities for students. I think it could only get better. Ms. Gargiulo, for many of you know that have students that are special ed or 504, we were talking the other night, can you imagine if we could do X and Y and Z? And then we started exploring, and I'm like, we could really change the way things look. And we also would have a lot of more collaboration, because you'd have probably one more ICT teacher per grade level based on the number of students. What do I see as the negative of the plan? I'll be honest with you, Mr. Kopis, I don't see negatives. From an educator's perspective, I think it's more in-depth teaching. I think you have your team all together at once. It's everybody has the same curriculum. There could be a lot of interdisciplinary teaching, but also that special ed component, they're also doing that piece as well. So on the larger picture, when I'm talking all, I'm thinking that I think it makes our programs in the elementary much stronger. And eventually, I hope we get to be able to do a lot more enrichment. When we talked about what would our libraries look like, what would this look like? So Dr. Ruller and I actually probably have 725 million plans, and every day we're like, but what if? So I know Mr. Hochreiter gets kind of tired of listening to us talk. We spent a lot of time over the summer going to each other's homes, because we couldn't go into the buildings, to actually start planning. And we would take the floor plans and we had them on the walls and we were looking through them. So I think there's only positive on my part. I think the anxiety is with adults, right? Because our kids are so resilient, and that's what we heard from a lot of our schools. So it's hard for mom and dad to say, I might have kids in 3 spots, or I might have, my kid has always been in Frank G and now he's going to be in BV. And what does that look like? And I think that's the anxiety for us would be the negative, is the worry of families. That would be my negative of it. Yes.
Lisa, one from Gina back there, just about ICT classes, which I know depends.
Oh, I missed it. Sorry.
It's all right.
Will it be one ICT per class or grade, or will there be more? It really depends on the number of students. So remember, in ICT, we have two different types of ICT. We have ICT full day. Some kids have partial day ICT. We actually have 3 sections. And then the third section is ICT skills. So right now, if we went to Princeton next year, my 4th grade would have 3 different sections of ICT. 5th grade would have 2 different sections of ICT. I'm assuming the incoming kindergartners, I'm either going to have 2 or possibly 3 sections of ICT. So it really depends on the need of the students that are in the grade level. One of the questions is if we do cut special ed teachers. And again, those are anticipated numbers based on the current students we had when I had to build my budget, right? Not what we will have when we get kindergartners in. I think I keep telling Mr. Hochreiter that I think I have 40 to 50 CPSE kids coming into kindergarten next year. And due to teletherapy and things to that nature, we're really not sure where those students are falling right now. So we've started to do some screening on families, live screening at the Hen Hud Library. So we invited them in small groups. Some people said, I'm not comfortable coming in. And some people yeah, I brought my kids in. So we're able to place kids and know where they are. But again, I can't tell you that there's really going to be 3 substantial cuts, because we don't know that until we know the students we have. This was a huge year for students moving into the districts with IEPs. A district our size might get 5 a year. This year I had 38, which is unheard of. That's like a size of maybe a Yonkers would get as a grade level, or a Mount Vernon, not a Hen Hud. So we have really amazing special ed programs, and people are hearing about it, and they are coming to our area. So there were a lot of special ed students that moved in. And again, the question is, where might these cuts occur within special education? Again, it's going to really depend. Like I said, I have 3 sections in 3rd grade now, 2 for next year for 4th grade, and 2 for 5th grade. So if you think about it, when we loop back down, do we need those sections? We don't know that until we know our number of students. But as we built our budget, we had to really think about the students we had in front of us and what we might be getting in. We still don't know what those kindergartners are. So we'll make sure that everybody is serviced and everybody has the right amount of students. And that's the big thing that I know that Mr. Hochreiter and I, and especially the board, are very cognizant of. And we want to make sure that the students that need the most have what they need. Did I miss any more, Josh?
No, if nobody else has any special ed or mental health, I believe that is it. Anything else for Mrs. Schuchman? Going once, twice. Have a good night. Thanks for joining us, Mrs.
I
Schuchman.
thank everybody for your time tonight. And please, if you have any questions, you know how, click my name on the webpage and you can send me an email or pick up the phone. I'm quarantined for the next 7 days, but you can call my office and they'll call me. So have a wonderful evening and be safe and stay warm. Thank you.
Yes, she's got swept up in some contact tracing. It's a real thing. Some other themes we talked about were equity. So as I mentioned earlier, when you have all of your students in the same place at the same time that need the same service, we're able to account for more consistent class sizes. And within those class sizes, we're able to balance different demographics of students. If I were in my office, I would show you a card that shows and cheerleads the fact that our average elementary class size is 19 students. That was last year. And that's a really great thing to celebrate, 19 students. But I know for a fact that at BV, you have had many classrooms that have had 22, 23, 24, 25. Very seldom has BV had class sizes of 13, 14, and 15. So while we say we have an average class size of 19, that's the law of averages, right? For every 24, you've got a 14. When you have students arranged in the Princeton Plan, you have 180 or 150 third grade students in one school at one time. You can spread them out evenly over teachers. All right. So you have a greater opportunity for class size to be very, very balanced across every teacher. Now, within those classrooms, we have different demographic factors. And New York State has identified 4 demographic factors when discussing children. One is their ethnicity. Basically, are they white or non-white? The second one is, do they receive, as Mrs. Schuchman talked about, special education services? The third one is, do they speak English and how well they speak English? And the fourth criteria is socioeconomic level, or in other words, do they receive free and reduced lunch? So the state asks us to report every year, every child, and whether or not they meet one or all four or any of those four criteria. So if Mr. Cohen were the principal of the second and third grade school, and he was dividing up students across his teachers and was making sure that every classroom had 20 children, he'd also be able to make sure that those students' demographics, those four characteristics I mentioned, are also evenly distributed. All right, so there is not a concentration of a certain type of child in one classroom where that's not evident in another. All right, for the same reason that one school may have kindergarten classrooms of 15 and another school has kindergarten classrooms of 25, right? That averages out basically to 19 or 20 kids. So one of the benefits of the Princeton Plan is it takes all of those factors out of it, because all of the kids are in the same place at the same time. You're able to find so much balance there. Other considerations in terms of the Princeton Plan are staffing. What are the implications? Look, I mentioned at the beginning, it's having your elementary schools organized in a Princeton Plan gives you more efficiencies, because everyone's in the same place at the same time. You need fewer teachers and staff to deliver that service. That's the math of the calculation. Now, the Princeton Plan, the way that saves money is we would need 14 fewer teachers to deliver the exact same service, because we're not spread out over 3 schools, right? We're centrally located. So there would be a reduction in staff. How you reduce staff? One of two ways. You have people who retire or resign, right? People who've retired, like you've had folks from BV that have retired, like Ms. Perel and some others. They've moved on, and Mrs. Tate, who's down at the beach right now, laughing at all of us. You can retire. You can resign. Some people resign. They have a baby and they don't want to come back to work, or they get a job opportunity and they leave the school, or they decide to move and no longer work with us. The other way is sometimes you have to reduce staff through laying people off. And the way that we lay people off, it's not my rules, it's not Mr. Cohen's rules or Mrs. Schuchman's. The state education department mandates that when you reduce your staff, it's the least senior staff. So usually it's your newer and or younger staff who would be laid off without a job. The goal with the Princeton Plan is to try to make sure that we minimize layoffs and hope that many people retire or resign because they move on to other things. So that's a moving target. Last year, for example, at this time, we only had 2 or 3 teachers that were going to retire. But as the spring, as winter came in the spring and spring came in the summer, and we realized just how big of a deal the pandemic was and how this year was shaping up, we had a lot of people retire because they said, "Okay, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Teaching on a computer and Zoom and Google Meet, it's too much for me." I would anticipate that. I'd anticipate that if a decision is made to adopt the Princeton Plan, we would have teachers who would say, "Okay, I'm not interested in change. I don't need to be interested in change. I'm not going to do that. So, I'm going to retire and move on." So we still don't know for sure how many folks are going to retire. I think some people are waiting for a final decision to be made. In terms of families, and I know there are some questions. I'll try to get back to them, or Mr. Cohen, you can interrupt me. There were questions about families and PTAs. So Antoinette Pio spent a lot of time talking to other parents, especially PTA members, in those other school districts, in Somers, Ossining, and Terrytown. Those are the 3 local school districts closest to us that have a Princeton Plan. And I think they learned a great deal of how you can run a really effective PTA when you only have 2 grade levels. Essentially, it looks like what those districts do is they have one big PTA for all elementary kids K through 5, and then each school has their own PTA to support the teachers and support the curriculum and some of the programs there. There are PTAs. They are very, very involved. They're organized a little bit differently, but they're still doing fundraising. They're still doing really good things for kids. They're helping teachers with grants and supplies and equipment. They're helping pay for after-school programs and summer programs, things like that. So we're not quite sure how the PTA would be organized, but those are some examples of 3 districts around us that are in the Princeton Plan and how they did decide to organize. A couple other, I guess one other topic we haven't talked about is transportation. Obviously, if you are a BV student and you're going to Frank G, that bus ride is not as long, so that's good. But if you're heading over to Furnace Woods, it's a longer bus ride. Kids will be on a bus a little bit longer. You folks and Frank G kind of get the benefit of the deal because Frank G and BV, I think, are only they're less than 2 miles apart when you drive it. I think it's like 1.9 miles. So the busing in terms of your children for those 2 schools is not going to be that big of a deal. Now, going to Furnace Woods, yeah, that's a longer bus ride. Right now, what I can tell you is that when BV students reach the middle school, and the middle school's next to Furnace Woods, that bus ride can be anywhere between 30 and 40 minutes. All right, so you can expect that if we do implement the Princeton Plan, that the furthest away communities in BV would probably be on the bus around 40 minutes going over to the other side of the district to Furnace Woods. All right. Now that changes every year. Now the reason that changes is because we have new kids that move into the district. We have 5th graders that leave. So every year the transportation system and the bus route changes. And it changes because we have new data. We have new kids in different homes. So sometimes the bus, your bus stop stays the same and your bus route stays the same. Sometimes it changes. And if it changes, that's a good thing. It means that we're using real-time data and new information to try to be as efficient as possible. But in terms of transportation, depending on where in the BV community you live, you could look at 30 to 45 minutes. Now, if you live in the northern part of BV, near Peekskill area or in Peekskill, that bus ride might be shorter because from that part of our district, it might be quicker to actually go through, to go down Washington and go up Hudson Avenue and down Maple Avenue to Furnace Woods. So just because you're on a Hendrick Hudson bus, it doesn't mean that bus can't drive through other communities. And I know sometimes when I go to work or when I go to BV, when I used to visit Mr. Cohen in the mornings or in the late afternoons, my map on my phone sometimes would take me through Peekskill because it was quicker than driving all the way around, down Montrose Station Road and past the district office and the free library. So it all depends, but right now, if you have a middle schooler going to the middle school or from the middle school coming home, they're on the bus around 30 minutes, and I think we can expect that if we move to the Princeton Plan. And with that, Mr. Cohen, I think in terms of our topics, I think we got through them. But
yeah, I think it was better that you finished everything, and then I'll just go through it, and
Sure.
if people have things at the end, we'll go from there. So I'm going back to Jen Monks. Is the teacher to student ratio at each school the same right now without the Princeton Plan? And the answer is no. So, in K through 2, for instance, we're at the highest teacher student ratio. In 3rd and 4th, we're actually lower. And then I think 5th, we go back up towards the higher end. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, look, right now our model is luck of the draw, right? And what I mean by that is it depends on how many kids live in each of our 3 neighborhoods that need a particular grade level experience, right? Sometimes BV gets lucky, and it's been a while, but there are times BV gets lucky and there's only 17 kids in a class. Sometimes BV gets unlucky and there's 24 or 25. One year, I think BV had, what was it, Josh, 22 kids in kindergarten, and another elementary school had 13. Now, why does that happen? That happens because at that particular point in time, that's how many 5-year-olds who are typically kindergartners, that's how many live in those neighborhoods at that time. And um, it's luck of the draw. It's hope, and hope is not a good strategy. So there are big discrepancies now. Those discrepancies are 100% based on which families live in those communities and which of those families have kids that go to school. So it's hard to make long range plans to that degree.
And one of the big themes that came up in the questions about equity and equality was the class sizes are not equal. It does not address those things, but a Princeton plan would, as Joe said before, it would be 15, 15, 15, 15, 15. It would make, everybody would be placed equally versus, luck of the draw where you just split. Now you have the lowest possible, or you're one away and you don't get that last student and you're at the max numbers. So that, I think, is one of the biggest positives. It would ensure class sizes are equal no matter what. So I think some of the other two after that were just kind of follow up in that category. And you can come back later if we missed anything. Are there any other cuts in staff besides teachers?
I think it depends. I mean, depending on if there are reductions in like kindergarten or first grade, some of those classrooms have aides or teacher assistants. Certainly every year we look at trying to get more efficient with our bus routes. So if we have fewer buses on the road, we need fewer bus drivers. So sometimes there are bus drivers that don't come back the following year, and sometimes those bus drivers are custodians. We're looking at teachers and class size. We mentioned class size. We're looking at class sizes in the middle school and high school, different classes that kids take. Not that we're going to reduce everything and everyone, but it's a conversation we have to have. Because times are tighter financially. So everything's on the table. And but in terms of the model of the Princeton plan, we start with the teachers because that's the easiest math in terms of knowing how many fewer classrooms we need, how many class teachers we need. And then based on that model, for example, Mr. Cohen, he has so many aides and monitors and teacher assistants based on how many classes are in the school. So that may change, depending on what model we end up with.
And the 14 was for the district. And what Joe said this morning is there's two, are they both retirements, Joe?
Yes.
So I believe that number is down to 12.
Correct.
For the entire district.
Yeah.
All right. Then the next one was what Mr. Kopis has a couple of them here. What school will the grades be as of now? Will the schools change year to year if the class sizes change? And then it was about size. I believe you're asking about the size of the actual buildings of FGL, BV, and Furnace Woods in that question? Yeah. Okay. Those are the three.
Yeah. So the good news is when we look at the model and we take all of our kids by grade level and roll them over, and then look at how many teachers we need, it almost doesn't matter what school has which grades because there are plenty of classrooms and there are extra classrooms. So every single school could have either combination and there would be leftover room. So that's a really good outcome, because if we have an influx of kids moving in, we have plenty of space. We've had opportunities, at least I know personally at Frank G, where we were running out of physical classroom space because they had a really big enrollment one year. But the one answer, Mr. Kopis, is all three schools could host any of the combinations. Now, a decision hasn't been made, and one of the reasons, to be honest, a decision hasn't been made is we didn't want that to influence the decision of whether or not the Princeton plan had merit, right? The same thing, and maybe your next question is, well, okay, well, who's going to be the principal? We didn't decide that either. In fact, Mr. Cohen and I and our team, we met, I think earlier this week and had a real open conversation and said, if you had your pick, what grade level of students would you choose to work with if you had to pick? And let me tell you, Mr. Cohen and Dr. Kramer and Mrs. Tracy at Frank G, no one wants to pick. You don't want to pick where you want to work. You want to work with all the kids all the time. So But that's a decision we'll make a little bit later on. I think where we end up will depend on some factors. Will depend on, for example, what school would result in the shortest bus run for 5 and 6-year-olds, for kindergartners and first graders, right? All three of the schools have plenty of bathrooms. They've got great, well, they got all new main offices and front doors. I mean, I know you haven't seen them yet, but when you can see them, they'll be great, and certainly safe and secure. New playgrounds. So it really doesn't matter. And that's kind of I don't mean that to be crass, but all of the schools could host all of the kids with plenty of room left over.
And I, just so you know, I said wherever Mrs. Flanino's going.
That is true.
Let's see. So then another question, if it's not Princeton Plan, is another option still rezoning? And then I guess the next question with that would be, is if it's like one of the options is a delay, what would the implications be for the following year?
Rezoning is really tricky, because what you're doing with rezoning is you're taking certain neighborhoods and you're moving them to certain schools. Moving certain neighborhoods to certain schools is not going to solve any of the issues we just talked about in terms of class size or equity or any of that, because it's not moving neighborhoods from school A to school B. You've got to move certain kids in certain grade levels from school A to school B in order to have that equity, because you could exacerbate the problem, right? If you moved my neighborhood, let's say where I live, and my neighborhood moved from school A to school B, if the 50 kids in that neighborhood aren't the right kids by grade level to influence or make any sort of positive change in terms of equity or class size or reduced class size, really all we did is we just played musical chairs. The benefit of the Princeton Plan is it doesn't matter where families move into. It doesn't matter if they move in next to the Copuses or next to me or next to, Ms. Pio. They're all going to end up going to the same school at the same time throughout their career. So that takes a lot of burden off. To be honest, it actually reduces some stress on the organization. But rezoning is really tricky, because you can never really achieve your goal, because you're taking a big neighborhood, you're taking geographical location, and you hope that you're capturing the right number of students by grade level and able to make that effect. And it just, to be honest, it just never happens.
Do you want to talk again maybe about the difference in school start times? And, if you have kids in multiple buildings.
Yeah, certainly we will take that into account. We're running a report right now that if we were to implement the Princeton Plan, how many families in our elementary district, how many families that have kindergarten through 6th grades have children a year apart, right? Not every year, but every other year apart, because that would determine whether or not you've got to be in 3 schools. So certainly we would try to balance or try to flex the start and end time of the school day in case you had to get to 2 places at the same time, to allow for travel time, those sort of things. So that decision hasn't been made either. As you know, BV and Frank G are on the same schedule, and Furnace Wood starts and ends a little bit earlier. That's a nice thing. I can tell you that sometimes hurts the organization, because teachers then have earlier start to their day and earlier end to their day. It's hard to bring all those teachers together because their schedules overlap. But certainly that's also, one of the reasons why we haven't, decided what schools, what grade level, and what the start time is. It's because we want to know how many families those start times could affect, and try to plan around that, because 5 or 10 minutes isn't a big deal in a big 7-hour day, but it is life and death situation for families, and especially with the number of families we have that work in the city. Your day is controlled by the train. So we know we have to take that into account too. But that's on our radar. It's just it would be premature for us to really start zeroing in on start times until a decision is made.
All right. How do you request what school? I think that'll just happen from above leadership. Is the transportation survey available?
I'm not sure I know about the transportation survey.
Ms. Monks, you want to elaborate maybe? All right, I'll come back. Ms. Monks, if you want to chime in between, feel free, and then Joe could answer from there. What other programs / funding cuts will occur? Will there still be after-school programs, sports, etc.?
Yeah, the answer is yes, yes, yes. And we're in our budget season right now. So we have a lot going on, right? We have discussion of the Princeton Plan. We're talking about our budget for next year. All of our department heads have been presenting their budgets and will continue to. I don't think we've had one budget that has an increase, projected increase of more than 2% for next year. That's a really good thing, because cost of living, the cost of just a new year of stuff and gas and heat and oil is already over 2%. So, we're making small adjustments to save money, right? On the top of BV, there are solar panels, right? We're buying we're getting our electricity from solar panels. At Frank G, we did a little test to see if we could power our parking lamps, spotlights by solar as well, and also by wind power. So there are a lot of small things that families and kids will never see that actually save quite a bit of money. We're having a study done to determine how much money we would save by changing certain schools and certain classrooms from traditional light bulbs to LED. That you'd be amazed at the millions that we would save over a handful of years. So this is the really big public discussion of cost savings, because it impacts kids and it impacts staff. But for years, we've been doing a lot of little things, to tighten the belt to make sure it's still affordable to live here. And we'll continue to do that. But we got to a point where we had to address some of the big ticket items, some of the elephants in the room, and one of them is this in terms of the Princeton Plan.
And Joe, I didn't see the end of the chat was the answer. Survey for the busing plan, the outside consultant in regards to transportation.
Yeah, so there's a little misnomer out there. The last time the school district did a transportation study was back in 2014 or 15, and that study was about bus routes. That study was about whether or not we should increase the number of students on a bus, which would reduce the number of buses on the road, which would reduce the number of staff. That study had nothing to do with the Princeton Plan. Now, what we do, and Liz Gilly, our transportation supervisor, she's been working with a consultant to help us get ready for the implementation of the Princeton Plan should we do that, because she's got the day-to-day system to run. And now with athletics happening, she's got to worry about athletic runs after school. So what the consultant does is basically she turns over the data stick of where kids live and what grade level they're in, and he starts to build fictitious bus runs and can identify how long kids would be on the bus based on a number of variables. So he's sort of like the bean counter in the back of the room doing the analysis. He's a really good guy, and if he were on this call, I would tease him. But he's got his glasses with his white tape and his pocket protector, and he's trying to figure out the best way to run our transportation system that does not have kids on the bus for 3 hours, because that would never fly. So that's not a study per se. That's just one of the many specialists that we work with to help problem solve some of our big challenges, and this is one of them.
Joe, can you talk about the the BV with that targeted for that special ed group?
Yeah. So a number of years ago, and I think it was back to 2017 or 18, a group of BV students who happened to have an IEP took a state test and didn't do well. And that's about it. Remember, over the last 8 years, the state education department and the federal government have made all of your kids guinea pigs in terms of taking some of these state assessments. Some of your children, if you have older children, anywhere between 2013 and 18, they were taking state assessments for 2, 3, 4 hours. They were getting frustrated. They were not completing their assessment. Parents started a movement, and it was parents started an opt-out movement, a test refusal movement, because of the student experience and the fact that Mr. Cohen and his teachers and myself were getting no data from the student tests. And the only data we got from the student tests were about a year later. So what happened was, as a threat from the state education department, because so many families were not sending their kids in to take the tests, a disproportionate number of BV students who happened to have an IEP did take the test, and they didn't perform well. So the state said, up, you've got to work on that. You've got to work on your special education students at BV to make sure they can take the test. Now, I'll also tell you a secret that many of the students who had an IEP that took that test at BV were also not BV students. They may be from Frank G or Furnace Woods because they could have been part of our ICT classroom. All right. So listen, I'm the superintendent and I should worry about this stuff. I don't. And the reason I don't worry about it is because state testing during that era has become a political football. Politicians use it to rate schools against schools. They use it to rate teachers against teachers. And one way they're trying to get schools to take it seriously is they're publishing the results and trying to really bully and harass schools by using the results. So few participants, but bully schools using those results, saying you're going to be in trouble if you don't fix it. I think it's a really small sample of kids that took a test that doesn't measure anything and they didn't do well. Now, what does that mean for the Princeton Plan? Nothing really. All that means is that, as Mrs. Schuchman said earlier, students that have an IEP are not going to be spread out between 3 schools. Students with an IEP won't be asked to move from BV to Furnace Woods or vice versa, because that's where the program is. We'll actually have greater control because, as I said, all the kids will be in the same place at the same time that are in the same grade level, and there are a lot of really good benefits to that. And but the state testing thing, I think, is just it's going down the rabbit hole, and it's not worth our time and effort. And as a superintendent to say that, I hope you really understand how little information we get from that state assessment. And to say we get little information is to suggest we get any at all. Mr. Cohen is the first to get those reports, and they tell him nothing about how well his teachers taught kids and how well they perform. So, I expect that to go away. And the reason I expect that to go away is because we've been petitioning the state to say, you've got a disproportionate group of kids that took a test that didn't do well. That's not reflective of all of you, and it's not reflective of the ability of your kids.
And what we learned is those opt-outs, which we didn't, make a big deal about, were averaged in as zeros. The students that are the ones named in that are all 9th and 8th graders at this time. And just all of a sudden last year, they decided to find some formula to make a group of 30. They used kids 3 years in a row, very atypical of how they normally would have handled things. So I appreciate you, Joe, sharing some light from your perspective as well.
Yep.
All right, Ms. Parada, besides missing out on another year to save the $1+ million on budget, are there any other negatives to voting this in now, but taking the year to plan effectively for the transition to start 22-23? I have a lot of concerns about this being implemented seamlessly/smoothly for September. It's already mid-March. How can you convince me otherwise about this?
Well, I'm not going to try. And the reason I'm not going to try is because I think there are 2 different levels of readiness. You heard Mrs. Schuchman talk about a plan and 10 different plans and be ready to go. We have to be ready to go in case the board says, okay, let's do it. We need to identify the teachers. We need to identify the principals. We'll have to pick the schools. But then there's a parental readiness, and that's going to take longer, right? We're also in a pandemic. We don't know what next year will look like. We don't even know what next month will look like. You probably by now got an email from me saying we're going to try to bring back more middle schoolers and high schoolers. there are a lot of unknowns. And for September of 21, that's anxiety producing for everyone, including me. I know we'll be able to do it, and I know we will do it well, but that will not change your readiness and your ability to make sure your kids are ready for this sort of change. So the decision very well may be to implement the Princeton Plan because it has merits and because it's the right thing to do for our community, but we're going to do it in September of 22 for all of those reasons I just mentioned. And that's very likely. And I think it's okay to agree with both of those positions. All right. I think it's okay to say the Princeton Plan has merit, but my goodness, in the next 6 months is not the best time. What I don't want to do is I don't want to have people that support the Princeton Plan and then lose their support because they think we're going too quick and we're going to miss something, we're going to jam it down people's throats. So that will be the discussion we all have as a community over the next month after the committee finalizes their SWOT analysis, and as a district we can identify the strengths and weaknesses and determine whether or not the strengths outweigh the weaknesses or the weaknesses outweigh the strengths, and then determine what the best timeline is to implement this. Listen, I have heard from more people than not that the Princeton Plan is long overdue, but come on, Joe, we're in a pandemic, right? We don't even know what April 1st will look like, let alone next September. So that's a consistent message. It's not you're not in the minority to feel that way.
So a related was who gives the approval? I believe it's going to be the Board of Education that gives the final thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah, the Board of Education does that because changing to the Princeton Plan is a policy change. And I don't mean to make light of it, but from a procedural standpoint, the Board of Education would say students no longer attend elementary school by where they live. They attend elementary school by what grade they're in. All right. So there's a lot of discussion that has to happen before that decision's made, but the actual the actual decision is really that simple, and it is the board's decision to make. And the reason it's theirs to make is they got elected to make financial decisions on behalf of the community, and we started this whole Princeton Plan conversation because of Indian Point, because of significant financial issues. Now, what we have learned by exploring the Princeton Plan is there are many other benefits in addition to just financial, and we have to weigh those, and then ultimately, right, timing is everything. So it's going to come down to the timing.
All right, and again, I'm trying to get these in the order you put them in, but I see as I'm scrolling now, there's some additional things. Some Ptas added. In the grand scheme of the budget, the cost savings to transition to Princeton Plan seems minimal. I think it's worth the cost savings, but given how minimal it is, I think voting in now and taking time to transition for 22. Given this, I would like to hear your opinion in transition so quickly, especially with COVID not being completely resolved come fall. And I'm just going to read you two others that are kind of connected here. Concern rushing while a pandemic. All right, I think Ms. Monks is different. Let me just say, and then Luke adding on to Erin, and maybe this is an Enrique question. How big are our tax bumps in the next years if we punt another year, but have to end up at the same finish line once the pilots wind down? It seems like the longer we wait, the bigger the bumps each subsequent year, and the harder it will be to get budgets passed. Another one, just so you could process this all, Joe, is wouldn't it be easier to handle the pandemic with Princeton Plan? As a district, we need to prepare our students for this plan. We keep focusing on why it'll be hard. It's only as hard as we make it. Our PTAs should be doing this. And I believe that is it. So if you could respond to all of those, Joe.
Yeah. So my answers are yes, no, 19, and maybe. Thank you very much, and have a good night. Those are all great. Those are all great points. The point with the Princeton Plan of why we would wait, and I'm saying, well, we're in a pandemic. Well, other people have said rip the Band-Aid off, right? Our kids, we have realized that our kids are pretty resilient, maybe more resilient than we thought with the model that we have right now, right? We've got 15 or 12 kids in a classroom. Some of you may have your children at home all day, every day, and kids have really responded. And so there's an argument to be made for that too. Like, okay, we've just endured public education has just endured the most significant change in the history of public education. We did it. We're going to keep making tweaks along the way for the rest of the year and whatever next year will look like. I mean, if we can do this, we can do the Princeton Plan. I agree with that sentiment. So there is a position to say, just rip the Band-Aid off. I think the issue is going to be, there was part of one of those questions was around the transitions. If we were not in a pandemic right now, how would it look differently? Well, we would have kids physically going on tours to other buildings. They would be meeting their teachers. The principals would be going to the other schools. We'd be having meetings with parents in big open spaces and being able to talk about this. And, we wouldn't be looking at everyone's living room. So it would feel different. It would feel more connected. It would feel more of a community initiative. And there would be more opportunities to observe and experience the change by physically being there, right? That's one of the things we lose, perhaps by doing this at this time, is we don't have that high touch environment that sometimes you really need in order to make a significant change. Luke's question about the the longer we wait, basically, do we just kick the can? Kind of. A Princeton plan, a budget without a Princeton plan is going to hover between 6 and 7% tax increase right now. Now that could change, and a lot of things could break our way, meaning we get more state aid from the New York State Education Department. We've been petitioning our state senator that we need more money in Hendrick Hudson because of the significance of the power plant closing. So I think that 6.5% increase will only go down over the next year, but it will be there the following year, and it will be 6, 7, or 8%. But Luke, very specifically, I'll send you the latest draft of our 5 or 8 year tax projection. We have a projection if we do the Princeton Plan, and we have a tax projection if we don't. Rule of thumb is for every year we have the Princeton Plan, the potential tax increase is almost in half. Almost, not mathematically in half, but pretty close. The savings are significant. And remember, every year you don't do the Princeton Plan are savings that we didn't experience, right? So let's say if we did the Princeton Plan, it'd be $2 million a year, and we don't do it for 5 years. Basically, we just increased everyone's taxes by $20 million to keep 3 separate elementary schools, if you look at it that way. All right. So it's tax avoidance. It's mitigating a big tax increase by moving to the Princeton Plan. In terms of Jen, you mentioned the PTAs. Let me tell you, the PTAs are on this. They have been meeting together. They've been meeting with other schools about how to get organized and how to support. In fact, I think Antoinette was on a meeting with us earlier this week where we had a very frank conversation about diversity and equity, all the things we talked about earlier, and we had some very powerful voices say that the PTAs need to do that too. PTAs do a great job fundraising and advocating and supporting teachers, but there was a consensus that the PTAs also need to take on some of the negative comments out there and educate families in terms of why equity is important and diversity, and why students should have access, to same experiences regardless of zip code. So I was encouraged by that conversation, and I'll tell you that our PTAs are ready to get involved. I also think that there's a risk. You lose some of the you lose some of the hominess of BV. I mean, I before the pandemic, I spent a lot of time in all 3 elementary schools. All 3 schools have a different flavor. They have a different DNA. They have a different climate, culture, and feel. And that's a really cool thing about our school district. I think that in the Princeton Plan, each of those schools are going to have their own climate and culture and DNA. And I think it's going to be really cool when 180 kindergartners move through the system together. If Mr. Owens, the middle school principal, was on this meeting, he would tell you how much time they spend in 6th grade just introducing kids to one another and doing icebreakers and get to know your neighbor, how much time they spend asking kids in the cafeteria to go eat with different kids that they don't know so they can get to know them. Now that's sixth grade. They're 12 years old. I mean, they spend a lot of time doing that work. So there are, there are opportunities there as well that sometimes we don't always think about with the Princeton plan. But I hope I got to most of them. I mean, I know, if we weren't in a pandemic, we probably would be handling this differently. We probably would have started this conversation in September and we would be done with it by now. The reason we didn't start in September is we didn't know what school would look like. We had really good reason why we couldn't fast track this conversation. So that's why we are where we are. I think that there are, reasons to rip the Band-Aid off and do it, and there are reasons to give it one more year. But going back to what Luke said, I'm going to take some liberties in his comment, and I'm going to say, I think a decision has got to be made sooner than later, even if it's to implement it in 22, because the more daylight between making a decision and when we would implement it, or I'm sorry, the more daylight between now and making a decision, it's only going to get crazier. We're only going to have more emotions, and sometimes, we take the information, we ask for input, and then we make the decision and we plan the best we can for it. So that will be my recommendation. It's not my decision to make. It's my decision to make sure people have information. But my recommendation to the Board of Education is going to be that by mid-April, make a decision. A decision should be it's off the table forever, and we'll never talk about it again. Or the decision needs to be to do it and then decide when. But make that decision and stick with it.
So you said mid-April. So I know people had asked about like the March 24th board meeting. When will the final decision be made?
I mean, it could be made as early as March 24th. I mean, I will be in touch with all of you in the next 2 weeks, because I'll probably host another series of meetings like this in each school to talk about the SWOT analysis, to talk about what this group believes the strengths of the Princeton plan, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and threats are. Because that gives you guys a window into their research, and really an opportunity to say, do the strengths outweigh the weaknesses? Are the weaknesses, can they be overcome? Do the opportunities of the Princeton plan, do they provide us with more hope than the threats do? So in the next 2 weeks, we'll have that conversation, just so you can see. Mr. Cohen is on that committee. After that report is final, he can give you his input. He can tell you what the spirit of the conversations were. Antoinette was in there. So was Katie Valentino. Mrs. Schuchman was in there. Those conversations will be so you can hear from the participants, so they can tell you what they believed at the time, but what other people believed. And that's how you sort of massage everyone's feedback and opinion. And a lot of people will still disagree, but I think everyone learned something from the process that they didn't know going into it, and that's really the important part of it.
So Luke asked a good question. Like, what is the most effective way to weigh in with opinions? Email the entire board, official comments to read aloud have more weight. There's some loud voices on social media, and it would be unfortunate for the loudest people to sway the Board of Ed inappropriately.
Yeah, I would tell you this board's not going to be swayed by social media. You're more than welcome to email them, and I would, if you're going to email one board member, email all of them so that everyone hears from you, not just your favorite board member or your least favorite. Having your comments read at a board meeting, that's a positive way to get your message out and have it be in the record really forever. So be careful, choose your words wisely, because they will be Googleable. That's my piece of advice. But look, I'm a public official. The board members are public officials. So emailing them is really important. And if you want other people to hear your voice, then you can certainly email my secretary, Carmen Koch, and ask her to have your statement entered into the record, and it will be. I'll tell you this about the board. Many of them have been around for at least 10 years. And sometimes that's a blessing and a curse. The reason it's a blessing for this conversation is because they've heard it all by now. They've heard all of the extremes and they've heard everything in the middle, and they've lived it, right? Their children have gone through the system, so they've had the personal opportunity to reflect, but they've been through other major decisions that our district has had to make. 10 years ago, for those of you who were here, I know Lisa Flanino was, we laid off 30 people between teachers and secretaries and aides and monitors. That was not fun, but many of these board members had to make that tough decision because it was the hard right thing to do at the time. And I'm convinced that this board, knowing them as well as I do, they will make the hard right decision. I think what's in the air is going to be when that decision should be implemented. And there are a lot of reasons why to implement now or wait a year, and that's just that's my sense of the matter. That's sort of what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing 6 months ago was, oh my God, the Princeton Plan, that's the most horrible thing. What I'm hearing now is it has merit, it has value. We really need to consider it. But my goodness, can we just figure out what the spring's going to look like in the pandemic, and are we wearing masks and da 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 da? It's an important discussion to have, but probably not as urgent as others. That's not my feeling. That's kind of a consensus of what I hear. However, if the board decides to do it and do it for next September, we will be ready. We've got a lot of work to do and decisions to make, but we will be ready. What's at risk is people who believe that we're moving too quick are always going to believe we move too quick, right? People who believe we move too slow are always going to believe that. So we're not going to change those opinions. Only student experiences will change those opinions. And it's going to take a little while for parents to believe that this is the right thing to do, because they're going to see it, through their kids' eyes and through their kids' experiences.
All right. And just so you know, I some of these are just comments of how you're feeling personally. At the end of this meeting, not only will I get the recording to post, but I do share the comments with Mr. Hochreiter. So, if you missed something, he'll be able to read through it later and see everything you wrote. And hi, Josephine. All right. If we go Princeton Plan, what about pre-K? Projected when? Full day, half day?
Oh boy, that's a dream. Pre-K is a dream, and the reason it's a dream is because families are struggling with childcare. More moms and dads are working, and it's an opportunity to get younger kids in our school system quicker. That's a great thing. Pre-K is not on the horizon right now. But I can tell you, and this was, I think, Mr. Kopas's question, whatever school has the kindergartners and first graders, there are plenty of leftover classrooms that if we chose to have pre-K, we could do that. I'll tell you that pre-K would be a game changer in our district in terms of families choosing to move here, because families need it. Families need reliable childcare, and if they can have reliable childcare provided by a real certified teacher in a school, having a school experience on a bus and in a cafeteria, and playing the recorder and banging on drums and playing on a playground, I mean, that would be a dream. So that certainly is a priority for us, but not urgent in terms of some of the battles we're facing right now.
All right, we've done all the chat things. Is there anything we've missed? Clarify. Give people a moment in case there is.
The silence.
All right, we'll give it the going once, going twice.
It's an auction. Hurry up, people.
All right, well, thanks everybody. Thanks, Mr. Hochreiter, for doing this. I know this isn't easy. We saw some kids in and out, and we just really appreciate it.
It was great. Next time we'll do it on a Saturday morning, right? We'll wake everyone up. We'll do it in our pajamas. But I don't want to see Mr. Kopas in his pajamas. You can sit that one out, Mr. Kopas. Yeah. Stay muted. Stay muted. Kids are on here. We'll see.
Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.